Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of my true crime podcast, The True Crime Cocktail Hour. Let me introduce myself. My name is Holly and it is Friday. Thank goodness. So that means it's time for me, once again, to mix us a little pre-weekend after-work cocktail that we definitely deserved this week. And while I do, I will also tell you the story of a mysterious true crime case. We'll be talking about a very recent case from 2025 and from Austria. Maybe you've even heard about it, the Großglockner mystery. A man goes on a mountain hike with his girlfriend. Less than 24 hours later, his girlfriend was found dead at the summit of the mountain. The trial has just concluded, but the verdict has not been finalized yet. This case, let me just tell you, really pulled me in rabbit hole, okay? And while I was doing my research, I also went through the comment sections, and it seems that a whole lot of people have a whole lot of different opinions about it. So it's kind of controversy, and I'm really excited what you guys have to say about this case. So let's not lose any more time. You sit back and relax. I'll get everything ready, and then we will open up case file number 112, Death on the Großglockner. On February the 19th, 2026, the trial against a 37-year-old man named Thomas began at the regional court in Innsbruck, Austria. Thomas is originally from Salzburg. He works as a cook at a retirement home, and he is an avid mountaineer. He has been in a relationship with his girlfriend, Kerstin, for a little bit over a year now, and the two of them really have a whole lot in common. The both of them, they really love outdoor activities. They're both very fit, and they spend almost every weekend out in nature doing some of these outdoor activities. Now, through her new boyfriend, Thomas, Kerstin also discovered her enjoyment of mountaineering. She has already done a few smaller hikes, but for January the 18th, 2025, the two of them had something really special planned. They wanted to climb the Großglockner together. At a little bit over 41,000 feet, the Großglockner is the highest mountain of Austria, known for its beautiful panorama and therefore quite popular among mountaineers. Now, Thomas over here is the one who planned this whole trip. He had climbed the Großglockner once before, so it would kind of make sense that he would take the lead, as he is far more experienced than his girlfriend Kerstin. But this day ended in tragedy. And now 1 year later, Thomas has to stand trial for negligent manslaughter. According to the prosecution, Thomas made 9 fatal mistakes, all of which ultimately led to the death of his girlfriend. The verdict came in on the very same day, 19th of February, and Thomas was found guilty of negligent manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 5 years on probation. In addition, he was also ordered to pay a fine of approximately $12,000. However, both the prosecution and the defense filed for an appeal. At the time this video goes live, no date has yet been set for the appeal, but I will keep you updated. But what exactly happened on that mountain? Well, thanks to webcam recordings, witness statements, and reports of the police and mountain rescue service, the 24 hours leading up to Kerstin's death can be reconstructed quite well. So in this video, we will walk through the day of January the 18th together. I will tell you all about the 9 fatal mistakes the defendant made according to the prosecution, and at the end of the video we'll have a little quiz where you can vote on whether you think the defendant Thomas is guilty or not responsible for his girlfriend's death. And I'm very curious on how you guys will vote on that. So let's go back to January the 18th, 2025. The sun had not yet risen when Thomas and Kerstin pulled their car into the forest parking lot near the Großglockner. The average temperature of the day was 18 Fahrenheit. So Kerstin and Thomas, they got out of the car, they grabbed their gear, and they set off. You have two options. You can take the normal route via the so-called Archduke Johann Hut, which is technically easier, but it will take you longer because there's a whole lot of detours involved, right? So it will take you about 7 to 9 hours to get up to the summit. Or you can take the difficult route, the so-called Stüde Ridge. Now let me make something perfectly clear. This route is not for beginners. Even in summer, they will only let the most experienced mountaineers attempt this route. The path is more direct, yes, but it is also steep. So you need to climb a lot, and that requires a certain level of physical fitness. This tour takes between 5 to 7 hours. Now, including the descent, which takes 4 hours and follows the normal route over the Archduke Johann Hut, and considering a 2-hour break to enjoy the panorama, this whole tour will take you about 13 hours, more or less. In this case, probably more, considering it is winter. And this difficult route, the Stüde Ridge, this is exactly the way Thomas chose for him and his girlfriend, with Kerstin's consent, of course. Now, one has to ask here, though, why Thomas would pick the difficult route, knowing that his girlfriend is far less experienced and that this route will demand a whole lot of her. And to the prosecution, this was mistake number one. The route was too demanding. And because this route takes so freaking long, you definitely want to be back in the valley before sunset, which is why the majority of climbers start very, very early, 5 a.m. at the latest. Kerstin and Thomas, however, started at 6:40 a.m., so almost 2 hours later, which, according to the prosecution, was mistake number 2. So the first stop is the so-called Stüde Hut at around 30,000 feet. Up to this hut, the path is still relatively easy. Only from there does the fork begin, where you must decide, are you going to take the normal route or the Stüde Ridge? So to help you make a decision, or maybe give you a first serve reality check, they put a yellow warning sign up at the Stüde Hut. And it says, and I quote, "If it took you more than 2 hours to get here from the valley, the Stüde Ridge is not suitable. It is now 9:30 a.m. Kerstin and Thomas took 3 hours to get to the Stüde Hut, but nevertheless, they continued onto the Stüde Ridge. So next up is the so-called Frühstücksplatzel. Now, for those of you who want to know, Frühstück means breakfast, and Platzel or Platz means area, spot, place. So Frühstücksplatzel means breakfast spot. And on this section, the climbing begins, which brings us to mistake number 3. The equipment. Now, Tom is over here. He is perfectly equipped. Proper ski boots and touring skis. Kerstin, however, uses a so-called split board, which is sort of like a snowboard that splits into 2 parts. And with it, she wore snowboard soft boots, which are not made for climbing. Yes, there are crampons you can attach to these boots, but still, not great. Now, like I said, Thomas planned the tour. And so according to the prosecution, knowing that this was her first really serious climbing tour, he should have made sure that she had the proper gear. Thomas and Kerstin reached the breakfast spot, the Frühstücksplatzel, at 1:30 p.m. They have already been on the move for over 7 hours, and they are significantly slower than they should have been. Now, from here, the ascent to the summit begins. And whether or not you want to continue on this route should be carefully considered, because the breakfast spot is kind of the point of no return. If you continue toward the summit from here, you gotta pull through, you have to follow through, because you must reach the summit in order for you to get back down. You can't just turn around and walk back again, because at the end of the day, it's still easier to climb upwards than downwards. And this is exactly why on that breakfast spot, they put a second yellow warning sign, and it says, and I quote, "If you took more than 3 hours to get to the breakfast spot from the Stüde Hut, turn back. Your life depends on it." Kerstin and Thomas took 4 hours. So let me get this straight, okay? They still have the entire summit ascent ahead of them, the most difficult section, and they only have about 3.5 hours left until sunset. So according to the prosecution, this is at the latest when Thomas should have known that his planning was not gonna work. He and Kerstin should have turned around. Mistake number 4. They continued anyway, because according to Thomas, everything was still fine at that point. However, a so-called Föhnsturm was forecast for this evening. A Föhnsturm is kind of like a special downwind, but it's far more dangerous. And as early as the afternoon, the weather started to deteriorate. The storm rolled in and it got windier. Now, combined with sweat and the cold, this can become very dangerous quite fast. And this was mistake number 5, according to the prosecution, misjudging the weather conditions. So you remember the Archduke Johann hut, right? You see there's a webcam attached to this hut. So during the day, this webcam will take a picture every 10 minutes and during the night, every half an hour. At 5:40 p.m., this webcam captured Thomas and Kerstin, or I should say their red headlights, still walking upwards toward the summit, even though the sun was already setting. But they kept going and they kept going. 1 hour passed, then 2, and so on. At 8 p.m., other climbers from the valley looked up and also saw the 2 red headlamps of Kerstin and Thomas. And these other climbers were now really alarmed because they thought, oh my goodness, like no one in their right mind would still be up there walking up the summit in this weather, in the cold and in the night. So they naturally assumed that someone was having an emergency and they called the police. So a police officer, he drove to this forest parking lot, and with the license plate, he was able to figure out Thomas's phone number. This police officer tried to call Thomas, but Thomas would not pick up his phone. And yes, you do have good reception up there. But because Thomas wouldn't pick up his freaking phone, this police officer also alerted the mountain rescue services. And together, they were now sitting in front of the webcams and just watched Kerstin and Thomas and the 2 red headlamps walking up to the summit. And they also noticed, and that was quite alarming, that Thomas and Kerstin, the higher they got up, the more and more slower they became. So it is now 10 p.m. Kerstin and Thomas are still up there and they still have a good way to go, which is why at 10 p.m. a police helicopter took off, equipped with thermal cameras and night vision. 45 minutes later, it reached the summit. Now with the helicopter spotlight, the pilot tried to get Thomas's and Kerstin's attention, right? But no one reacted. They did not turn around, they did not give an SOS or any other signal that might indicate that they need help. And eventually the pilot was like, well, I can't force anyone to accept help. And so he turned around and he flew back down. Kerstin and Thomas have now been on the move for 18 hours. The storm has picked up significantly. The air is freezing. Gusts are whipping snow through the air. The wind is tugging at their jackets. You cannot understand your own freaking word over the roaring wind. And this is when, all of a sudden, according to Thomas, Kerstin was completely exhausted. This is, by the way, the first time Thomas took a look at his phone and therefore saw all of these missed calls from the police. So Thomas called back the police officer, and this police officer was like, oh my God, thank goodness, right? Now, they had a brief conversation. Interestingly, they would later very much disagree over the content of this phone call. Thomas said he asked for help. The police officer later quoted Thomas by saying, "We don't need help, everything is fine." What is even more interesting is this. In the following hours, the police over and over again tried to call Thomas, but he would just not pick up his phone. Mistake number 7, no communication possible. So Kerstin and Thomas managed a few more yards. They also managed to overcome the last difficult section. Less than 328 feet remain to the summit, but Kerstin cannot go on anymore. Her legs won't carry her another step. Now, all she could do at this point is just sit down. So she sat down in the cold snow with no protection from the storm. It now feels like -4 Fahrenheit. It is dark. We are in the middle of the night now. It is stormy, windy, ice cold. Now, this webcam at the Archduke Johann hut took another picture during this time. This is the picture, the original picture. And knowing the story, I think this is so spooky. But you can clearly see the glow of the headlights near the summit. Now, Kerstin and Thomas are up there, and Kerstin cannot go on any further. She is exhausted, she's hypothermic already, and therefore, in the meantime, became disoriented. Now, Thomas stayed with her for another 90 minutes before he descended alone to get help. Now, according to the prosecution, leaving her alone there was mistake number 8. Although, one must ask, what's the alternative, really? So anyway, Thomas is on his way down to get help, right? And his first destination is the Archduke Johann hut because he knows that sometimes other climbers will stay there overnight. So his hope is to find somebody in this hut that can possibly help him. Now, this is, however, where it gets really mysterious, because later they would find a bivy sack, a sort of like winch-proof sleeping bag, and a thermal emergency blanket in Kerstin's backpack right next to the body, both unused. Why would you leave your girlfriend alone in the cold if you know she got those things in her backpack? Why would you not take out the blanket and the sleeping bag and cover your girlfriend with it to keep her from freezing to death? Only Thomas knows why he didn't do that, but according to the prosecution, this was mistake number 9. So Thomas set off at around 2 a.m. in the morning. At 3:30 a.m. in the morning, the webcam at the Archduke Johann hut took another picture of him descending from the summit. Because as it turned out, the Archduke Johann hut was completely empty. There was no one there. Only now did Thomas call back the police officer, and this is the first time, according to the police, that he asked for help. At the latest now, even Thomas understood the seriousness of that situation. Now, the police and mountain rescue services would love to send another helicopter up there, but the storm was raging, no freaking chance, so they had to wait a couple of hours until the storm passed. And so in the early morning hours, we're talking 4 a.m., 5 a.m., a mountain rescue team set out on foot. At 7 a.m. in the morning, the storm had finally passed, and so the helicopter called Christophorus was finally able to take off, and it headed northwest to the Großglockner. And as they approached the summit, the pilots were able to see a human outline in the snow. So while the helicopter was still up in the air, they guided the mountain rescue team to this human outline. The mountain rescue team reached this place at 10 a.m. in the morning, but all help came too late. They found Kerstin's dead body right below the summit, frozen to death in the early morning hours. Now, Thomas over here, he himself never commented on these accusations. He only stated through his lawyer that he deeply regretted his girlfriend's death. Now, the question is, where are we exactly on a scale of everyone is responsible for themselves, all the way over to, well, if you're an experienced mountaineer and you're going to take a tour with a less experienced person, you kind of automatically become the responsible person. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, Thomas was found guilty of negligent manslaughter. The residing judge, a man called Norbert Hofer, he explained that the defendant was far more experienced, therefore he was effectively the leader and had the responsibility. However, the judge also said that, according to the court, the defendant was not a murderer or a cold-blooded person. According to the judge and the court, the defendant made 6 mistakes: poor planning, misjudging his partner's abilities, failing to turn back in time, inadequate emergency measures by not using the bivy sack, lack of communication, and triggering a rescue too late. But other points were not considered his responsibility or were seen as mitigating factors. For example, Kerstin voluntarily went on that tour. Thomas really did try to help. He was possibly under a lot of psychological stress when he realized that his girlfriend was weakening. Also, his inability to look at the freaking weather forecast was not held against him. Now, ultimately, only Kerstin and Thomas know what really happened up on that mountain. Maybe Kerstin at some point told her boyfriend that she was tired, that she can't go on any further, and Thomas was like, come on, it's just a couple of feet, like we're almost there. And maybe Kerstin didn't want to ruin the tour, disappoint her boyfriend, be the weak little woman. We don't know. This is actually a phenomenon called summit fever. You just want to finish it. You want to pull through. The goal is so close that it kind of outweighs personal safety. Now, before you decide, here's the kicker though. Plot twist, okay? Get this. Thomas's ex-girlfriend also testified in court, and she told the court that Thomas once too had left her on the Großglockner in the middle of the night unprotected because she was too slow. Allegedly, Thomas back then told her something like, "Don't be so dramatic." So Thomas hit the brakes, he was gone, and this woman was now up on this mountain in the middle of the night all by herself. And she had to make the descent by herself, which fortunately she did do. But as you can imagine, man, this relationship was over before Thomas could even spell out Großglockner. Now, as you can imagine, this testimony spread like wildfire. People went crazy over it because, I mean, for starters, it kind of shows that this might not be a one-time fatal mistake, but maybe a pattern. And I mean, let's be honest, it also says a lot about his character. It gets worse though. After her testimony, a whole lot of women came online and shared similar experiences. And they basically said that they also experienced their husband, their boyfriends, their partners, leaving them alone on a mountain hike of that sort. Probably, maybe even somewhat intentional to get rid of them. Now, so many people started talking about this that this phenomenon, which is quite new, is now called alpine divorce. So now it's your turn. You're the judges. What do you think? Is Thomas guilty or is he not responsible for his girlfriend's death? I cannot wait to see how you guys are going to vote about that, but be sure that I will keep you updated about this case on my channel. And with that, we close case file number 112, Death on the Großglockner. Thank you so much for joining me again today. I hope you found this case as fascinating as I did, and I really want to hear your guys' thoughts about it. So head down to the comment section or just say hi. And as long as you're down there, you might as well hit that subscribe button or don't. It's your call, really. Anyway, if you don't have any plans, Friday in 2 weeks, I would love for you to join me again for another cocktail. And obviously, another mysterious true crime case. Next time, we're heading to sunny Spain, and we'll be talking about a very mysterious murder and a whole travel group of suspects. So I'm really looking forward to that. Until then, have a lovely weekend. Try to relax a little bit. Kiss. Mwah. And I'll see you then.